So you guys being college football legends.
What a birthday gift for me, right?
Yeah. And you guys being the all the success you had in college football. If I would have told you when you guys were playing, hey, one day UCLA and USC are going to the Big Ten. What sort of reaction are we getting if UCLA, USC to the Big Ten was the story? Because that was the story yesterday. They are on their way to the Big Ten in 2024. So now we've got all these potential matchups. We've got all this conversation. This comes down to money, correct? The amount of money the Big Ten could offer as opposed to the Pac-12. That would be my assumption.
And the amount of money that those brands can generate. I mean, because that's not just, Yes. Now, let me ask you this, because I'm assuming this, right? All the sports go into the Big Ten, right? Or at least
all the sports. Right. I mean, the only one that would not is beach volleyball.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Wouldn't work well.
That bothers me a little bit. I would want beach volleyball to actually be a part of it.
I'm with you because I look at it and go, first off, there's great volleyball programs in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to bring in a bunch of sand and put it in a play box around a volleyball court.
Live from Rutgers. It's beach volleyball.
How many frat parties do they have where they bring in sand in the Big Ten country?
That is right.
I'm
saying.
Good point.
I'm just saying, too. But you're talking about basketball as well. That can matter and can count for the conference. So, yeah, it's definitely about the money. We know that, and we also know how big of a brand in terms of football tradition and history and culture USC football is. Now, UCLA maybe not so much, but UCLA has been competitive at times. Have had good players come out of, for certain, consistently have had good players come out of UCLA. So, and Chip Kelly, he seemed to get it back on track this past season. So, if he's still there, I think it lines up to have. I don't want to sound like a Big Ten elitist, but it lines up to have really, really interesting matchups that are sellable matchups, that are monetizable matchups. I don't know how much success UCLA or USC will have in that type of a conference, having to stay in it. But I think it's great for the conference to have it. I think that it does push it over the top of being a super conference, and I think that it makes the case that whoever comes out of the Big Ten, or maybe even the second team in the Big Ten, there could be multiple teams that come from the Big Ten that could end up in the NFL or the college playoff.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought was Rose Bowl. Like, I literally first thought the Rose Bowl. Like, this is Pac-10 back in the day, Big Ten back in the day. They'd go through the regular seasons. The top two teams would get the playoff in the Rose Bowl. Like, that's what it made me think of. Mm-hmm. And the combination of the two going, well, who didn't love watching the Rose Bowl, right? Like, now you get this potentially every week because you've got USC and UCLA, who are two of the, you'd say, better programs. I mean, as far as football goes, USC is the best football program in the Pac-12. As far as basketball, UCLA is the best basketball program in the Pac-12. So as far as those two brands, and you're taking both those two brands, two teams, your universities, in the second biggest media market in the country, and you're adding them to your roster. Like, there is so much value from the standpoint of the Big Ten, their geographic footprint, and their ability to go literally from East Coast to West. There is no other conference in sports that can say they can do that. None. Mm-hmm. And so literally you go from the Jersey Shore, from D.C. all the way to L.A. And that is huge, and it's powerful. And it's why, the Big Ten, obviously, those rights are going to go for, more than the SEC, more than anything else right now. And really, when you think about the big media markets, it encompasses Chicago, number 3 as far as media markets. It encompasses L.A. now, number 2 in media markets. You do brush up against the East Coast. You get those bigger markets that, traditionally they're not college football towns, but now people are going to start paying attention and people are going to start watching more. And so your window on Saturdays, it starts at noon to watch games, and it can go all the way until 10 p.m. Pacific time. Yeah, that is a huge revenue driver for a conference where the SEC just doesn't have that. They don't. And the other thing I'd say that I think it's lost in all of this is if people want to blame USC or UCLA or the Big Ten Conference, you can do that if you want. The reality is this has been a long time coming, folks. This has been. This has been a lack of leadership at the Pac-12. It goes back to Larry Scott, their commissioner, the Pac-12 commissioner, who never figured out their TV rights distribution, who could never get the Pac-12 network up and running so it was actually successful and able to pay the universities more. He was constantly behind there. And by the way, blame USC, Pat Hayden, Lynn Swann, all their athletic directors who constantly fumbled, the lack of leadership at their university after Pete Carroll, who, they had as good of a run of success as anyone in college football, but it fell apart because they cheated. And they never were able to recover from that. So that led them to a spot of desperation where they look around and they go, well, everyone else in the Big Ten and the SEC is making $30 million or more on average from their TV deal than we're making. We can't compete with that. You just can't. And so this isn't the end of the realignment or movement in college sports. This is only the beginning. And a lot of it was brought on by the lack of leadership and everything else that occurred long before Texas and Oklahoma decided to join the SEC in a few years. It was before that. And I think COVID actually helped expedite this whole movement because what happened, and I've talked to Jonas about this, we as a people, when COVID hit, we stopped kind of like, oh, yeah, we want to make sure we look out for one another. No, everyone's first thought was like, I need to go find a way of getting like the food I need. I need to go get remember there's a run on toilet paper?
Sanitizer wipes. You can only have one.
Sanitizer wipes. Like no one could buy enough of it. It's like, okay. Like you need 5 packets of toilet paper? Yeah. You can't spare one? I mean, it started then, honestly. And that's around the time, too, when you saw Texas and Oklahoma go, I don't think the Big 12 is going to last very much longer. We'd rather go to the SEC. It makes sense geographically. Texas already looked at that anyway. And I think it started the conversation with a lot of schools and a lot of conferences. Like, what's our future? How does this play out for us? And, kudos to the USC and UCLA for looking past saying, we need to stay in the Pac-12 to keep this conference afloat. That's just not where college sports is. You're moving towards 2 super conferences, and it's going to be the Big Ten absorbing Pac-12, maybe some Big 12, and the SEC absorbing the ACC probably. That's where this thing's going.
And by the way, on the COVID front, of all the Power 5 conferences who handled it the worst, I would say the Pac-12, and it's not even close. And they were exposed as having no direction, no plan, no idea what to do.
They're just followers.
Meanwhile, you've got like players from the Big Ten who are on the forefront, like leading these marches in public. We want to play. Can we please play? You got the SEC who was already in, the ACC was already in. I look at it and I go, from a traditionalist standpoint, I don't like it because I just think of them as Pac-10, Pac-12 growing up watching it. But it makes sense because one of the numbers I heard that was thrown out is these schools in the Big Ten with the new TV deal coming up are going to get $100 million apiece. Like that was one of the numbers. I don't know if that's completely accurate.
High.
Okay,
I mean 70 plus million. But just with the announcement of USC and UCLA, Apple is now re-engaged in conversations with the Big Ten for streaming. I mean, that was like on the table, then it wasn't. Now with these 2 schools come along, they're back in negotiations. So to your point, maybe it will be $100 million per year, but it's going to be at least 70 plus million.
Yeah, why should they wait around for the Pac-12 to figure out, their ass from their elbow if they couldn't figure it out during COVID and they haven't been able to figure out this whole time? Make the move. Go make your money. I think it's
about if you're going to be competitive, you have to, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're Lincoln Riley and you left supposedly Oklahoma And some people thought, oh, well, it was because he didn't want to have to go play in the SEC, and they didn't think Oklahoma was going to have the resources that other SEC schools have. Okay. So you go to the Pac-12 where you're at USC, and Mike Bonarino and everyone else out there is giving you all the support they can.
Wow.
Well, guess what? Now they're giving you even more revenue and support. The problem is you got to go play at a conference where it's like playing Utah every week. Like, go get all the star quarterbacks and wide receivers you want. If you don't have the boys up front in the trenches.
And that's what I was about to say.
Oh, Iowa, Wisconsin. Good luck, folks. Have fun with that every week.
And I was saying I didn't want to sound like a Big Ten elitist, but I think that's going to be a hard road to hoe for UCLA and USC. I think it gives them a lot of relevance in terms of, like what you said, Q, I thought was a great point, is the viewing audience. Now you're bringing a viewing audience that really, really finds watching college football on Saturdays relevant to the Pac-12 teams. So USC and UCLA will have a viewing audience that they just have not had. It hasn't existed. Most people have tuned out for some reason on college football when it gets to the late night games. Now you've changed that viewing audience that would see USC games on a regular basis or UCLA games on a regular basis, but they're going to struggle. I mean, when Maryland came into the Big Ten and Rutgers came into the Big Ten, you watch these teams struggle, and you start to realize certain things about Big Ten football that don't exist in other conferences. I mean, you can get it in. You can see that physicality in the upper echelons of teams in the SEC. You can see it in maybe one or two teams in the ACC. But you don't see it on such a consistent basis like you do in the Big Ten Conference, where you're talking about the upfront play, the size, just the sheer brute size and strength of those players. It's just it shows up. You know, in a bowl game, it's one thing. But when you got to do that week in and week out against teams like Wisconsin or teams like Northwestern or Penn State or Ohio State or Michigan, that's going to be a tall task. But I'm excited to see it. I say that. Yeah. I'm happy for it, and I get to go to a game, at least one game or two, in California to see Penn State play.
That's right, baby.
We are.
Yeah, we are. I mean,
Penn State.
The interesting thing too is there's so many alumni out on the West Coast that probably weren't tapped into quite as much, and this is an opportunity now. I mean, I heard someone from Ohio State. They have 25,000 alumni in the state of California. That largely might have just been like, oh, yeah, I love football, but I'm not waking up that early to watch a noon game or whatever the case is. It opens up all those doors. I think the hardest thing is going to be on really both sides. Like if you're a USC or UCLA player, you now can be waking up on a regular basis, playing games at 9 a.m. Local time for you, noon Eastern. That's a tough transition to have to fly across the country and do that. Your body clock better get on point.
Yeah.
Or if you're a part of a team in the Midwest, you're flying out to the West Coast, and you might be playing a game as late as 10, 11 o'clock your time.
Yeah.
As far as kickoff, and you got to get used to doing that on the flip side of it. So there's going to be some adjustments on both sides. I think by and large, though, the Big Ten's a more physical, bigger conference that runs the football. And that's going to get tested, like whether or not USC is going to be able to build their program to win in that conference. Where look at Michigan last year. Great defense, physical, rushing attack. Like, they haven't had that. That just hasn't been something at USC since Pete Carroll's there, since, Matt and Reggie and those guys. And they're going to be tested. Like, they're going to be tested as much as they ever have been before.